2, 1, go. Go.
Good evening and welcome to Freedom is a Constant Struggle with your host Kidu Nyasha, and board hopping is Jackie Perez. Before I introduce my guests Ziad Abbas and Nadya Tannous, here to discuss the latest assault on Palestine, I want to call your attention to the California prison's torturous policy of sleep deprivation. In isolation units throughout the California prisons, under the guise of suicide prevention, guards wake prisoners up every 30 minutes. These security welfare checks cause ongoing sleep deprivation, long defined as a form of torture by the UN and myriad sleep and mental health experts. California claims it prevents prisoners from killing themselves, but these checks actually increase the risk of suicide, as does solitary confinement, because they're inhumane, serve no welfare or security purpose, and cause serious mental and physical harm. Paradoxically, these checks result from the prisoners winning a settlement in their federal class action lawsuit to improve mental health care, Coleman versus the California governor. But the attorney misrepresenting the prisoners has signed off on this torture. People housed in California's administrative segregation, psychiatric services, and security housing units, and on death row, are kept alone 24 hours a day with no direct contact with other people except guards. Despite the Coleman lawsuit, California's so-called Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation continues to deny prisoners adequate, if any, mental or physical health services. Our Committee to End Sleep Deprivation has reports from captives in 14 California prisons about their suffering from the checks. One prisoner wrote, quote, "I feel as though I don't get any sleep at all. My eyes hurt from being puffy, swollen, tired, and irritated. My body aches from tossing and turning back and forth. Nothing blocks out the loud, alarming, beeping, echoing noises and hitting sound from the metal bar. This is the longest I've ever been deprived of sleep," unquote. To help end this practice, please go to prisonerhungersstrikesolidarity.wordpress.com. I'll repeat that, prisonerhungersstrikesolidarity.wordpress.com, and click on the sleep deprivation tab. And that commentary is thanks to the Sleep Deprivation Committee. And now I'll introduce our guests. If I can find it. Now that I'm completely messed up here. Oh, here we go. Ziad Abbas is the program manager for cross-cultural programs of the Middle East Children's Alliance, Mecca, of Berkeley. Originally a Palestinian refugee from the West Bank's Dheisheh refugee camp, he co-founded the IBDAA Cultural Center in Dheisheh. Ziad is also a filmmaker and journalist and educator who has worked with Palestinian and international media, participating in the production of several documentary films. He was the co-producer and production manager of Promises, nominated for an Academy Award in 2002. Ziad completed his Master of Arts in Social Justice and International Relations from the World Learning Program of the School for International Training Graduate Institute. Nadya Tannous is General Coordinator of the Palestinian Youth Movement USA and the Education and Advocacy Coordinator at Interfaith Peace Builders. She holds an MS in Refugee and Forced Migration Studies from the University of Oxford and a BA in Anthropology and Global Information and Social Enterprise Studies from UC Santa Cruz. She is a passionate community organizer with a focus on refugee rights, transitional justice, youth education, and inter-community empowerment movements. Nadya was previously on staff with Friends of Sabeel North America. She was coordinator and co-speaker on the 2017 U.S. National Tour of No Child Behind Bars, Living Resistance from the U.S. to Palestine. welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us, Keely.
Yes,
Thank
both
you.
of you. It's just wonderful to see you again. You've been here before, Ziad.
Yes.
And it's good to have you back. And you'll have to come back too.
I hope so.
All right. So let's talk about the latest happenings in Palestine. Maybe we should start with Trump's cutting off aid and also declaring Jerusalem, planning to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem.
Yeah, I think, it's been interesting, since the Clinton administration and Congress in 1995, there's been a waiver that has been signed by the United States sitting president every 6 months, basically waiving the move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. No embassy up until this point is situated in Jerusalem at all.
Right.
But the purchase of that land in Jerusalem for the U.S. Embassy happened in the 90s, and it's still there.
Right.
Or perhaps, we don't know how much longer. But what's interesting to me about what Trump has said on Jerusalem in these past months in his decree is not necessarily the U.S. Embassy move, but the declaration of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Right.
I think, where the embassy sits now in Tel Aviv is also stolen land. It's also land that are from refugees who are not able to return. In Jerusalem, it's the same. It's simply moving it from one location to another. To me, it's the symbolism of declaring the Jerusalem as a capital of Israel when 40% of the city is Palestinian and underserved and living in an apartheid state.
Exactly. And wasn't East Jerusalem, part of Jerusalem taken during the 67 war?
Yes.
You want to talk
Actually,
about that?
part of Jerusalem, what we call it West Jerusalem, it was occupied in 1948
Right.
and took by the Zionist groups in that period before they announced Israel as a country. And later on, 1967, the Jordanian army, part of the Jordanian army, actually, they were in East Jerusalem, and they occupied East Jerusalem in 1967. Now, East Jerusalem, it's part of the occupied territories, they call it,
Right.
which is West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza Strip, Golan Heights in that period, and part of Sinai. Now,
Excuse me, but people should know that Golan Heights was taken from Syria.
Yes, Golan Heights from Syria, part of Sinai from Egypt, and Gaza Strip, Palestine, West Bank, Palestine, and East Jerusalem.
Right.
And it was known, there are many resolutions in United Nations actually clarify this and speak about the rights of the Palestinian and consider this area as occupied.
Right.
And for the Trump decision, actually, it's a violation for the United Nations resolutions, all since 1967 until now. It's a violation for the international law itself because it's considered this occupied area. And we saw how the response actually came from United Nations. What happened exactly?
Explain to our viewers who may not know.
Absolutely. After that, the Palestinian Authority, they went to the Security Council. And as usual, the American government, they used the veto to block any resolution against Trump. So there were 14 countries, they voted against Trump decision. And of course, United States, they used the veto. So they blocked it. After that, Palestinian, they went to the General Assembly. And I think we had 128 countries against that decision.
Yes.
And only 6 countries they voted for, and the rest were abstentees. They didn't accept that. They didn't vote for it. Now, internationally, the international community, they are aware of that. But what's going on is something deeper than this. There are many issues since Oslo Agreement started in 91, before Oslo, even the negotiation between
And
Palestine.
Oslo happened in 93.
Yes,
right?
September 13th, 1993, Oslo Agreement signed by both sides here in the White House. Israel tried to, they postponed certain kind of the deep or the complicated issues, the negotiation about the complicated issues later to the final negotiation. And right now, since 1993, and we are in 2017 actually, when he announced that the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and he decided, okay, we will move the embassy to Jerusalem. But there is a plan to get rid from what they call it complicated issues. It's Jerusalem, East Jerusalem. Second, it's the borders. Third, settlements. Fourth, it's the water issue. Fifth, and the most important issue is the refugees.
Right.
This is related to your first question about the cut of the support to United Nations, to Unruh. United Nations.
United Nations Relief
Yes.
and Works.
Yeah, so the
Agency.
idea is to destroy this kind of issues, to make it difficult. This is how the Palestinian people see this issue. He
Right.
targeted Jerusalem. Okay, we'll recognize Jerusalem as the capital. We'll be the first country to do that, to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Second, we will move our embassy to Jerusalem. Third, we will cut our support to the United Nations. And this is a pressure on the Palestinian refugees. Palestinian refugees issue is a very sensitive issue. You speak about 750,000 Palestinian refugees. They were uprooted in 1948. They were uprooted from 531 villages. This is during the establishment of the Israel state.
Exactly.
This year it will be 70 years for Israel state and what they call it independence, and it will be 70 years for us to commemorate the Nakba. Now, these refugees...
Nakba meaning the catastrophe.
Yes, exactly. Nakba means the catastrophe. Now, for us, Palestinian refugees right now, our numbers, it says all the Palestinian refugees inside Palestine, even inside Israel, and in the diaspora all over, including the United States, we are 7.9 million Palestinian refugees. We have 5 million, almost close to 5 million Palestinian refugees registered in United Nations as refugees. The rest, they are refugees, but they are not registered in the United Nations. So by doing this cut, it's part of it, it's like to start tackling this kind of what they call it complicated issues. And Israel looked to the refugees, and especially Palestinian refugees, they are struggling for their right to return to Palestine. I am a Palestinian refugee myself. My parents, they were uprooted from 2 villages. My mom coming from a village and my dad in 1948. And my family, they are living everywhere between Jordan, West Bank, here in the United States, but the whole family, they are struggling for right of return. So this kind of cut, it will impact Palestine a lot. It will impact United Nations a lot.
Right. And let me inject this. I read where some Palestinians have said that they won't be able to eat behind these cuts. Obviously, you will continue to eat, but what about some of the Palestinians who are going to lose this? They said they're going to cut $65 million out of aid that's usually about $120 million. So this is definitely going to impact the poorer Palestinians in maybe Gaza and West Bank or East Jerusalem, right?
Yeah, this will impact Palestinian refugees everywhere, because it will impact Palestinian refugees. They are living in Syria right now, and they are stuck still inside Syria, and they still receive that we have close to 300,000 Palestinian refugees still in Syria. Some of them depend on United Nations services. And here when I speak about United Nations services, I will be very clear. And I feel proud that I'm a Palestinian refugee and I am who I am right now. I grew up. It means that I used to stand up on the line to receive the food when I was young, a child, in a line every day to receive the food from United Nations.
From UNRWA.
From UNRWA.
Gotcha.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
And I use, this is part of who I am, my body. It's United Nations milk, United Nations rice, even it was not good milk and not good rice, but still we survived. So it means it's survival issue. The people, they were dependent on that.
Jump in.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And for the people like in Palestine, in Syria, or in Lebanon right now, we have like The last statistics came recently. They speak around like 174,000 Palestinian refugees. They are still living in the refugee camps in Lebanon. And actually, they are living in very miserable situation, because you can add to that the Syrian refugees who came to live with them in the refugee camps. In Gaza Strip, which is another issue, you have 2 million Palestinians. They are living on 139 square miles. And most of them, 54% of them, they are children. And most of them Palestinian refugees, and most of them depend on the United Nations. This kind of cut, it will impact every Palestinian, I can say, almost every Palestinian refugee, especially who's living in the refugee camps. I don't know if you want to add.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what Ziad says, it's really important to underscore just how much, you know, UNRWA supports and is a part of everyday life for so many Palestinians who are living either internally displaced within Palestine, so within Gaza or East Jerusalem or the West Bank, and then Palestinians who are living beyond the created borders by the State of Israel, you know, in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria. I think, you know, I remember very clearly in 2008, 2009, Canada actually cut their funding to UNRWA, and they had previously been giving one of the largest sums, maybe it was 9 million,
something,
and they cut it to zero. And the impact of that alone created a food shortage for 80% of the Palestinians living within Gaza itself.
Wow.
And so that was of course before the onslaught of what the Zionists call cast lead, but the onslaught
Operation
of Gaza.
Cast Lead, oh God.
Precisely, and it was right on the heels of that.
And that was the one where they killed 2,000 people, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And about 500 children?
Yes.
Yes, this is very brutal.
Really, I remember that one.
But I want to go back to the United Nations, just to add what Nadya said. If we will go back to the history of UNRWA, this is the most important part, because if you go to other refugees and conflicts in the world, they are under the United Nations directly.
UNHCR.
Yeah, exactly. But Palestinian refugees, what happened in 19, and this is, we call it conspiracy, came from United Nations. They don't want to consider the Palestinian people like many other refugees in the world. What they said in December 8, 1948, actually, they took a decision in United Nations to establish a special agency to deal with the Palestinian refugees, not to consider them under United Nations directly, to establish UNRWA, special agency. And this is actually American, they played big role in that decision.
I'm sure they did.
Yeah. So in May 1st, 1949, this is when United Nations came to replace the Red Cross. Red Cross International, they were like relieving the Palestinian refugees everywhere. After during the catastrophe and after. But United Nations came in May 1st, replaced the Red Cross, and they started serving the Palestinian refugees. And that period, everything the Palestinian people, they were refugees, depend on United Nations. Like food, school, and for me, I grew up eating the food from United Nations. I went to United Nations schools. This is why my English language is still not good enough, because I grew up in the United Nations schools. You start learning A, B, C, D in the 5th grade. And they taught us actually there in the school that Columbus discovered America. We find out in different way. They have certain kind of curriculum censored by the Israelis. So the health, the doctor, for example, it's run by United Nations. In my camp, I did one time a study about our camp. We had one doctor for 12,000 people.
Oh my goodness.
And the doctor worked from 6 hours a day, from 8 o'clock at morning until 2 o'clock. And we find out that the average 400 patients visit the clinic per day. If you divide 6 hours in 400 patients, you'll find how many seconds for each, or minutes for each patient. This is the kind, what the services of United Nations, it's not that much big services, but still, in the United Nations, UNRWA, it's for us, it's like a political umbrella where it's show the Palestinian refugees as a cause still alive.
And the interesting thing, just to go off of that, I was thinking the same thing about historicizing UNRWA. I mean, UNHCR, which does serve literally
and
every...
what's the acronym stand for again?
United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees, I believe. The High Commissioner of Refugees. So UNHCR, they serve every other refugee group. The only one that they are not allowed to serve are Palestinians.
Wow.
Because Palestinians are supposed to be served under UNRWA. Now, the important distinction between UNHCR and UNRWA, aside from their very interesting beginnings and strategic beginnings,
Yes, of course.
is that UNHCR has a protection mandate. UNRWA does not have a protection mandate legally.
And
so
what does that mean?
What it means is, exactly, so UNRWA is literally just a service provider. They provide food and health and education, but in terms of legal protection or protection of a refugee from international law, refugee law, they do not have that mandate. Another arm was created, I believe it's called the UCCP, and that was actually supposed to be paired with UNRWA. That became a ghost organization. It's completely shelled out in 1951. And that was the protection mandate that was supposed to go with the service component of UNRWA for the Palestinian refugees, under which we would have things assessing right of return, status of Palestinian refugees in their host countries, things like that. And so what has happened, because that has been shelled out and is basically still operating, they produce a report every 6 months, I believe, or every year, that says that they have nothing to report. So because that effectively does not exist, we've basically, as Palestinian refugees, been put into a temporary system permanently. Because this system, as UNRWA was actually presented to the UN, and as the UN presented it to the Palestinians and to the international community, is that UNRWA would be a temporary structure for a temporary issue. Well, of course, we're a protracted refugee population. My grandparents became refugees in 48. My father was at Schneller camp in Jordan, and here we are. I'm here in the diaspora, and we're still here.
Yeah, to add to that, Nadya, actually, if we can see other issues, refugees, for example, in East Timor, or even in ex-Yugoslavia, even in Africa, where you find the United Nations deal with the refugees direct, where we saw some refugees return back to their homes, because it's connected to the political UN resolution, for example, by the Security Council, the General Assembly can push and implementing. And there is a consequences if any other country will not accept or accept the resolution, there are consequences coming from United Nations. On our issue, for example, it's different. There is no political, just they are doing the services. And for example, in my camp, if the Israeli army impose the curfew and start arresting the people, UNRWA cannot do anything, just they are watching. And the other refugees under the direct UNHCR, they are like, they can report to United Nations, and United Nations, they can return back, what are you doing? They can ask them,
right.
You need to release, they can put a pressure. But in UNRWA, actually in UNRWA, we have like over 100.
So they pretty much left Palestinian refugees defenseless.
Yes, and even if you are an employee in UNRWA, you are not allowed to be a political activist.
Yes.
I have friends, they were fired from UNRWA because they participated in political activities. Wow. Even if you are a Palestinian, even if you are a Palestinian refugee, you are not allowed. This is how UNRWA, they have, I'm not saying because we love UNRWA, we want UNRWA to continue do the services.
About the UN.
The UNRWA, it's the special agency deal with the Palestinian refugees to relieve the Palestinian refugees. We want it because it's the main international sign
agency,
for Palestinian refugees.
Right.
Not because their services. I can write many papers about the corruption in UNRWA. But the idea, this is the main international organization dealing with Palestinian refugees. Especially you have 19 refugee camps in Gaza, 19 refugee camps in West Bank, 8 refugee camps in Gaza, and you have like the rest. We have 59 refugee camps all over, like between Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Gaza, West Bank.
Let's talk for a minute about the children and how just recently it hasn't come up to the level of intifada yet, as I understand it, but the Palestinian kids were throwing stones at the soldiers and stuff, and they were really upset and rankled the Palestinians, this East Jerusalem number that just went down. So several, I think 8 kids were shot, right? 8 children?
Yes.
And they were aiming for the head and upper body, so they were aiming to kill them, no doubt. And talk a little bit about it. You want to address that?
Sure. I think,
Nadya.
you know, your point of particularly the children who were targeted and arrested by the Zionist occupation forces, the intent is absolutely to maim or to kill. And I think through that it is the fear that instead of the usual practice, which they do often, of attempting to disable children and adults alike, there was almost like an up the ante, because they knew, and the United States knew as well, that declaring Jerusalem as the state of Israel, it's a big declaration. It means a lot. It carries a lot of weight, even though the reality on the ground doesn't necessarily change as of now.
Yeah,
The
they have a
reality-
fascist in the White House to back up Netanyahu.
Precisely, a fascist and a fascist. And so I think, you know, one of the practices in general of taking children in, from Palestinian children in, and putting them into prison, holding them in local police stations, doing so without a parent, without a guardian, without a lawyer, without translation, without habeas corpus.
As young as 7 and 8 and
Yes,
10? And
as young as 7 and 8. So just to contextualize that a little bit, Israel is the only country in the world with a juvenile military court. So other countries have adult military courts, but Israel is the only country in the world with a juvenile military court. So what that means is that if you are a Palestinian child in East Jerusalem or in the West Bank, you do not have the right to a civil court. You are treated and charged as a military combatant, right? Which
Right.
means that there is a military judge. You don't have the right to stay silent. You don't have the right to representation. All of these things. And that's why the conviction rate is over 99%. I mean, it's like 99.6%,
It's
right?
just a joke.
Yeah, it's a joke. It's a kangaroo court. You know, you can
Yeah.
go through, you can come up
A
to the
kangaroo
stand.
court for kids.
Absolutely. And so, you know, in doing that, you know, for adults, this is one thing. And we know that a large number of Palestinians go to prison or are currently in prison, particularly males.
There are thousands right now, right?
Absolutely.
Sorry?
3,000. That's what
No,
Palestine- no,
7,000.
7,000.
Yes.
What?
7,000.
How many kids?
Over 300.
Over 300 children.
Yeah.
And actually that number usually fluctuates anywhere between 300 and 500. At one point in 2016, during some of the larger clashes, particularly with the use of knives, the number went up from 500 to 700. And so it was actually much higher. And so I think the main point here with taking children is that it is a different level of violence and terror, because instead of solely taking adults, they are going for the next generation. Right? It's the idea that you cannot do anything. You cannot sleep in your bed. You cannot walk to school. You cannot, kiss your mother or your father at night. They might not be there, but you might not be there. You can't do anything without them watching you. And so it is definitely a punishment for the entire society for resisting occupation, apartheid, and for standing up with dignity to situations that are and structures that are set to oppress us every day. They penalize you. The Zionist forces will penalize you with your freedom, with lack of sleep, with lack of nutrition, with withholding access to education.
Oh, I'll never forget when they got together and said that they were literally discussed depriving Palestinians of water
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and food too,
And the
putting them on
water.
a diet. and
Yes,
shit like- stuff
absolutely.
like
A
that.
calorie count, the water that
Yeah.
the water that is present.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes the Zionist forces will come into camps or into other areas and spray skunk water, spray a chemical into the tanks themselves.
Oh.
They might shoot bullets into the black water tanks in order so that they empty,
They mess up the water.
and then you don't know when they're going to come back to fill it up.
And one of the other things that hasn't been mentioned is the fact that when they bust these kids, or even the adults or the kids, they often go back to the homes and blow up the houses.
So, yes, I mean in terms of demolitions in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, absolutely, this is another form of terrorism. So, because there are so few permits that are given to Palestinian families to fix their wells, to fix their houses, to build an extra room, to do any sort of maintenance on their home, Palestinians will often just go ahead and do it. They will build, because they're growing as a family, they'll build an extra room, they will fix their well, they will access their well. That actually dictates that the whole structure is illegal.
It's like the system they use. Actually, they use different kind of laws to control the life of the Palestinians. For example, they use the Ottoman law.
Yes.
They use the British law. They use the Jordanian laws. They use the Egyptian laws. They use the Israeli laws, and in addition to that, they use the military orders, which since 67 until now we have. In addition to these laws, over 1800 military orders. These why when she spoke about the military court for children in West Bank and Palestinian children, and it's part of the racism. If you go look to Israel, children the same age, the Israeli children, they go to the civil court, they have rehabilitation center, they have different kind of system.
Sure.
Because they are Israelis, they are Jewish, they are
Right.
Palestinian child go to the same the same age, go to military court, go to the cell, the torture section. There is a system set up to target, to destroy the spirit. I know, like, even when I was a child, I was arrested a few times when I was a child in my refugee camp. And you don't need to do anything to be arrested. You don't need to be a political activist
like
or
here,
throwing
black
a,
people don't
just
have
you
to
are
do
in the
a
wrong
damn thing
place,
to get
wrong
arrested.
time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wrong place,
We
wrong
know.
time.
Or you have dirt on your hands, and that shows that you
Yeah.
have thrown stones.
Yeah, something like this where you go to jail and there is a torture. Here, actually, when you think about it, like internationally, I can have a wall of reports about Palestinian children, their rights violated by the Israeli occupation, and still we see the international community, they are not doing that much to support the Palestinian children. But on the other hand, I'm not looking just about Palestinians as the victims. Palestinian children, they are part of the struggle of Palestine. Palestinian children, they are grow up, and we have the famous case right now. Maybe Nadya, she can explain more. One of the girls, she grew up. If you go back, Ahad Tamimi, for example, and Ahad I use not because this specific case, but she represents the generations.
Right.
They grew up. She grew up. You look to her pictures in the history when she was 7, 8 years.
Let Nadya say what
Yeah,
you're
go
talking
ahead.
about. Nobody
Yeah,
knows.
go ahead.
No, I think absolutely. Just, Ahad is an example of the larger lived experience of Palestinian children across the board.
But-
she is the daughter of.
But we haven't told the audience yet what happened.
Oh, yes. So Ahad is from the village of Nabi Saleh. She is the child of Bassem and Neriman Tamimi, who are two very famous activists. The village of Nabi Saleh is in the West Bank. It is near a settlement of Halmish, it's called. Halmish was established, and the settlers came out of the settlement basically to try and take control of Nabi Saleh's spring, of their water. So back to water, control of resources, and of course the land. So there was a campaign that was started, still continues of course, to protest the settlers taking over their resource. And so they historically, the whole village would march every Friday against the obstruction of their well. Of course, the Zionist forces, so the Israeli occupation forces, will come forward to the village. They'll close the village down. They will, put out an order, a military order that changes the area of the village from maybe B to C, for example, which dictates that these are like the West Bank is constructed Zone A, Zone B, Zone C. And so they'll use those zones in order to be able to exact more violence, certain orders. For example, they can say this whole area is Area C, which means that your home is illegal. It can't be in this area. That means that you're not allowed to be in your home, so you have to leave the house. But there's tear gas all around the home, so they trap people inside their own houses. That's an example. Ahad grew up. She's spending her 17th birthday in prison as we speak. And she grew up.
But you didn't tell what happened.
Yes, she grew up as a child.
No, I mean, she slapped the soldier.
She did, but
Right,
but this is one incident. So
I understand that, but people saw it all over the media, mass media, this child slapping the soldier.
A fully
and you're telling who she is,
yes,
and where she came from, and what the conditions were,
yes,
that produced this incident.
Yes. So in this exact incident, I guess,
Right.
it becomes arbitrary in a way because she can go to prison for anything, right?
Exactly.
But in this instant, absolutely, it is important, the details. She was filmed outside of her home with her mother. The soldier came forward fully armed, of course, to try and enter her home. Ahad rejected his access to the house by slapping him. So, as you said, the very provocative image of a 16-year-old girl slapping a fully armored Israeli soldier.
Went viral.
It totally went viral. And the background to that exact event, actually, is that her cousin, Muhammad, was shot earlier that Friday in the head with a rubber-coated bullet by the army. And he was in the ICU unit until very recently in a coma. He's now missing the front part of his skull. Ahad's cousin has also, Jenna Jihad, she's, one of the things she says is she's the youngest journalist in the world. She's been doing journalism for a very long time. She is Ahad's cousin. And she gave a context when Ahad was first taken that there were actually children playing on the other side of the house, and the army was attempting to gain access to the house in order to, of course, terrorize the Tamimi family, but also in order to gain access to the roof and be able to harass and shoot at the children down below. So, this context is important, the event is important, but what's important about Ahad is that she has been living under occupation her entire life. Her family has been resisting occupation. Both her mother and her father have gone to prison multiple occasions. Her mother was shot in the leg when she was quite young and was on crutches for, I believe, 2 years.
Yeah, who can blame her for not containing her rage?
Her uncle, her aunt, they were killed by
goodness.
live fire. Her mother actually caught her brother, her uncle, his death on tape. The exact moment. And the family has dedication to continue their struggle because this is part of the larger Palestinian national project and movement for dignity. And so I think with these just abominable things occurring, what we see in that video and as it went viral, it's not just a very poignant image, but it shows the bravery of Ahad herself, of her mother, and also of every Palestinian child and person who is living under occupation in apartheid as well as in the diaspora. She is an example of the Palestinian spirit.
Oh, I obviously, really. And, the Palestinians, I admire you so much. The only people, the other people that I admire as much are Haitians. Haitians are fighters, and Palestinians are fighters. No matter what you put on them, they fight back. You can count on you guys to fight back. And we need to learn from you, both peoples. We need to learn a lot about fighting back and different tactics and strategies and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I can say for us as a Palestinian, no doubts, we learned from others too. Like,
For sure.
yeah, we learned a lot from other people. Even like, we learned from the Vietnamese, we learned from the Indian, we learned from the Algerian, we learned
Exactly.
from United States. We learned.
Exactly.
When you are under oppression, of course, what we
Yes.
call it, there is a language. It's the suffering language.
Oh, yes.
It's coming under
Oh,
oppression
yes.
where it's influenced the people and they learn from each other. But I can say for the Palestinian people in general now, not just 70 years, but this kind of occupation right now and the way how they get the support from United States. And it's very hard. It's impact every Palestinian. When she was speaking about Ahad Nadya, and this is the regular Palestinian life. Any child, I'm not just, any child anywhere. You spoke about Gaza in the beginning. 8 children, they were targeted in Gaza, and they were the soldiers. Even there is no threat because the soldiers, they are in the safe place. They are in their towers, and they are protected. And the children, they are far, and just they are angry, throwing stones as a result for what Trump declaration. And just they target them, they shoot them in the head, they kill them. Because the value of the Palestinian life in the eyes of the Israeli soldiers is nothing. You can shoot, you can kill,
Exactly.
you can even use like a Atari game or video
we
game
know
and
about
kill.
that here.
Yeah, exactly.
we
And I
do.
think in the United States sometimes there are certain kind of similarity where you can find when there is no value for the other human being in front of you.
Exactly.
Absolutely,
Exactly.
you can do what.
No value.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to go to the source of the problem, which is to a large degree AIPAC, right here in the United States, the American Israeli Political Affairs Committee. All right? And my understanding, my clear understanding is that if you want a seat in Congress or the White House, you'd better kowtow to AIPAC. And if you don't, and if you have anything to say, if you even mention the word Palestinian, can I say ass? Yeah, your ass is grass. Okay? Now, 2 people tried to speak out again for the Palestinians, 2 Congress people, Cynthia McKinney and Earl Hilliard, and they're gone. Okay, so folks in America, unless and until we deal with a Congress and a White House on Capitol Hill that supports totally the Zionist occupation of Palestine and now is going after BDS, we'll talk about that, we have to change the Congress, not just keep voting more of these creeps in, but I think it's time to stop the BS reform and go for revolution, because there's no way that this 70 years is going to stop until the U.S. Congress and White House stops backing the Israeli occupation, the Zionist occupation of Palestine.
What I would say is, absolutely, AIPAC is a huge tool. I mean, they took every single first-year congressperson on a trip, fully expense-paid trip, to Tel Aviv, around different
Exactly.
cities.
There
I
you go.
think, for me, the actually larger base is that the United States is a settler colonial nation, and it will always support other settler colonial nations.
That's a good
It
point.
will always support Canada, it will always support Australia, it will always support New Zealand, and it will always support the State of Israel. And so I think in that they see each other, they see themselves.
Of course.
Like the United States sees a younger version of themselves.
Yeah, they're even supporting Duterte in the Philippines, who's mass murdering people.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Hello?
And in all of these places, there's a long history of local indigenous people supporting one another. In the Philippines, you have the Palestinian flag being flown. You have political prisoners in the Philippines in solidarity, statements of solidarity, hunger strikes, for example, in solidarity.
International solidarity.
Absolutely.
We have
with
to.
Palestinians, and the countries are so far away, but the experiences are actually so similar. They're not the same, but they are similar.
Yes.
And it's exactly what you were saying, Ziad, the language of oppression.
Yeah.
And also in terms of when we get to settler colonial nation, this is the language of power. Now we have power as well.
Yes.
But this is the
I'm glad
larger
you said that,
overarching.
because I get
Absolutely.
so tired of hearing people say, we have no power. Yes, we do.
We have power.
Yes, we do.
Absolutely. But
I feel like I have power.
you do. I think for us, we have power as individuals, we have power as movements, and we have power together when we join.
Exactly. We can't be like this, but we're like this, we really have power.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. But for the United States, it's something like even and for some Palestinian people they call it, and here I speak as a journalist, and what I hear sometimes they consider the Israeli occupation, it's the Israeli-American occupation of Palestine, because the strong connection between the United States and all the support that the people
It
they
couldn't
are
happen
looking
without
for.
it.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the resistance movement for this kind of oppression that the Palestinians they are living as, they try to learn from the South African actually. And here what we saw actually in the apartheid system, during the apartheid system in South Africa. And when we spoke actually about the demolition the houses, we speak about the collective punishment, even in comparison between the apartheid system in South Africa and Israel, actually the South African who experienced they say the Israeli occupation is worse because part of it is the collective punishment, because if you are a fighter or you are part of a movement active against the occupation, they take you to jail in South Africa. But in Israel, they take you to jail, they punish your family, they destroy your house. And when they destroy the house, if you are living in a refugee camp, you destroyed the other houses because the house is connected to each other. So you destroyed many families around one person, and this is part of it. Now, for the Palestinian, they try to learn from the South African. At the same time, we try to learn from the mistakes, like where it was sometimes, especially when it comes to Palestinian refugees, because we still have in South Africa over 7 million landless in South Africa, even since 1994, since Mandela won the election. These people are still landless.
Well, they made a big mistake. In
this
South
is when
Africa.
we speak about Palestine, we need to be...
They let capitalism continue.
Exactly.
It's as simple as that.
So I think Palestinians, they try to follow that. This is when they had the call for, came from the civil community organizations in Palestine, asking the international community to be in solidarity. Maybe you can explain about this more.
Sure. I mean, we had civil society groups across the board.
We only have about 5 minutes left.
So many of them that had, women's groups, students, trade, etc., who called for boycott, divestment, and sanctions from the Israeli occupation, and also infrastructure, also culture and academia.
Yes.
Right? And so in order to halt the normalization of the occupation, but also halt the means of production for the occupation. That's including, of course, Tel Aviv and Hebrew universities, where so many of these plans of occupation were actually created, imagined, and then put to practice.
Right.
And I think when there's internationalism, we have our struggles and movements, and we have a strong history in those as well, which is so rich, and we must draw from that. I think boycott, divestment, and sanctions today is extremely important for us to look at as a tactic, as one of the tactics for trying to not only non-normalize the occupation, but bring it down.
I think it's
bring
the
down
only way
the structure.
It's going to come down, really. And it could be very effective. However, what do you do about universities that are punishing youngsters for, you've heard about that. Talk about that.
I was
I think it was
actually
Boston University that was
Yes.
punishing people for BDS.
Yes. You know, I was actually a student at the University of Santa Cruz. It was my year that passed the divestment bill at UC Santa Cruz. And my entire 3.5 years at the university as an undergrad from the age of 17 to 20, we were part of a federal investigation. It was a Title VI investigation onto anti-Semitism at UC Berkeley, UC Irvine, and UC Santa Cruz campus.
Which is ridiculous because you're Semitic.
I am Semitic, but also the most ridiculous part about it was the fact that they were saying we as students for working for and talking about Palestinian rights were physically endangering Jewish students on campus.
Oh my goodness.
And so through our speech, we were intimidating and we were actually creating an unsafe environment for Jewish students on campus.
Oh
and
my
so the this investigation was actually targeting the University of California for offering us support, for allowing us to be on campus. And there were many intimidation tactics, let me tell you, that at the time you think are ridiculous. Looking back at, you know, I'm almost 10 years later, I can't believe that as 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, we went through such process that became regular in our university lives. I think that inspired us and emboldened us to continue this tactic of aiming for divestment bills, etc., because it showed us that it worked.
Right.
And that's something to be afraid of.
Right. Thank you. Nadya, Tannous, Ziad, Abbas, we're almost out of time. We're out of time. Middle East Children's Alliance. And your organization?
The Palestinian Youth Movement, USA.
Right on. Thank you so much for joining us on Freedom is a Constant Struggle. I'm Kilu Nyasha, and board hopping is Jackie Perez. Thank you, Jackie, and thank you, viewers, for tuning in. And have a good evening. Power to the people. Power to the Palestinians.
All power to us.
Right.
Thank you, Kilu.
Thank you again.